Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live interview with Mr. Bert-Jan Ruissen. We are here to discuss the Common Agriculture Policy, or the CAP, as it is called. Mr. Ruissen is negotiating the CAP on behalf of the ECR group in the European Parliament, and he's even involved in the trilogues meetings now. Yeah, he is the right person to do it because he has a vast experience in the agriculture industry. He comes from the Netherlands. He's been involved in the Dutch Ministry of Agriculture for almost 20 years before being elected to the European Parliament. He served as a policy assistant in the European Parliament as well. And his studies have been in agriculture studies. So yeah, we're very honored to have you. You are an expert on the matter.
Thank you, Adriana.
I will just very briefly mention for anyone who might not be familiar with the Common Agriculture Policy, the CAP, what it is and the role it has for Europe and for the people. So it was launched in the 60s. The CAP is meant to support the farmers through funds directly supporting their income and of course their productivity. That is the biggest part of the CAP. Pretty much 2/3 of it goes to that, to supplying the farmers' income. And then it's also used for developing rural areas and tackling climate change and supporting sustainability. Now, like I said, it is the biggest item in the EU budget, 40%. So it is important that we talk about this. And yeah, it affects 4 million jobs, or it includes 4 million jobs. And of course, it is about our food, it's about our water, it's about yeah, our daily life is actually very tightly linked with the Common Agriculture Policy. So I'm glad that we can talk about it today with you. So could you please, Mr. Ruissen, summarize for our audience what are the main sticking points of this new or the reformed CAP? And then you are part of the Reformed Christian Party in the Netherlands and part of ECR in the Parliament. So could you tell also what is your role and your place in the CAP discussions and debate?
Yes, sure, yes. Well, first of all, I think I would like to stress that there's a broad consensus in Europe that there's a need for a common agricultural policy for securing our food production, for strengthening the resilience of the farmers, for example. So as you indeed mentioned in your introduction, the common agricultural policy is, well, let's say, a cornerstone of the European cooperation, the European policy. Coming to the new Common Agricultural Policy, we can say that we have now already a kind of an agreement at the level of the European Parliament. We have a vote in the European Parliament, and there is also an agreement in the European Council about the new Common Agricultural Policy. So that means that Parliament and Council they have now to negotiate and to find a compromise about the Common Agricultural Policy for the coming years. There are indeed differences, let's say, kind of sticking points on the table, but I think that we will work will work them out. One of the questions is, one of the questions on the table is, which part of the budget do we reserve for the so-called eco schemes? Eco schemes are specific schemes to reward farmers for their efforts to, well, in the field of environment, animal welfare, and so on. So the council say, well, let's reserve 20% of the budget for these eco schemes. And the parliament said, well, let's reserve 30% of the budget for these schemes. So that's one of the big issues. And another issue is, another question is, what's the best way to facilitate well, the integration of sustainability at farm level? Well, leftist parties say always in these kind of situations, let's come up with more rules, top down, with high EU standards, with high goals at the EU level. That's always the reflex which is coming from the left, to be honest. My answer, and the answer of my political party to that is, well, this is not the right direction. We must not come up with more rules. With more rules, then we will only, well, let's say, frustrate and demotivate the farmers. Instead of that, what we have to do is we must, in our view, provide adequate resources and schemes in order to, well, let's say, reward the farmers
incentives, yes, to provide incentives
in the field of sustainability. That's our approach in this discussion.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you for telling us that, for clarifying that for us. And then to meet the parties on the left, let's say halfway, what are your ideas? What are your suggestions to make? Because I know that you and your party do want us all to have food that is safe, nutritious, that is affordable. So what are then your ideas? How do you suggest we go about it, that we maintain the sustainability of farming?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to realize that the agriculture has a lot of challenges to face. And I think the first challenges also for the future is to produce sufficient and healthy food. Because we have to realize that the world population is still growing and growing. So that's, for me, still challenges number one. In addition to that, indeed, I fully agree that the food production must be sustainable and must contribute to, well, respect for biodiversity. We have to protect our air, we have to protect our water. I fully agree to that. But as I said before, I think it's not the good direction to press the agricultures going in that direction by adding more and more rules. And unfortunately, I have the impression that the European Commission tends to go in that direction, tends to go in the direction of more rules and more unrealistic goals. For example, the European Commission proposed that in 2030 the share of organic farm has to be 25%. Mm-hmm. That's a real ambitious goal. And well, organic farming is good. I fully agree with that. That's not the point, but I think it's not the good direction when the European Commission well is pushing that in that direction by well mentioning it as a official goal in the legislation. Because in the end, also the development of organic farm, in the end, it is the consumer who decides. And when the consumer is not buying the product, then you can push the production of organic farm. But when the consumer is not buying it, then in the end you will create a surplus of organic farm, and then you will create a disaster on the market. So just to make clear that, in my view, it's not good to facilitate the directions going off of. So there will be by more rules. But what we have to do is we have to support the farmers, for example, by the eco schemes. So then we can give support the farmers to reward them for what they are going, for their efforts in the field of sustainability. And what we have to do, for example, is we have to invest in new varieties, for example. We have to invest in new techniques, and we have also to strengthen the resilience of the farmers, because the economic basis has to be good.
Yes, yeah, of course. Thank you for that. What can you quickly talk about the farm to fork strategy? Because you mentioned farmers and organic farming and all this. What is your take on that? What is your
about the farm to fork strategy? Well, there are indeed good ideas in the farm to fork strategy, because yes, we have to support sustainable agriculture. But in my opinion, the farm to fork is too much in the direction of top down, by fixing unrealistic goals at the EU level, and I think we have to follow more bottom-up approach. So we have to give the farmers the tools, so instruments to be able to produce in a more environmental friendly manner.
Right. Okay. All right. And since we're talking about farmers and farms, there are, according to statistics, about 10 million farms in the EU. Like I said, about 40 million jobs depend or are either upstream or downstream connected to the farms and in the industry. However, a very large portion of the EU budget through CAP, or the budget of CAP for farming and fishing industry, goes to large industrial farms and not to, the small family farms. So what are your thoughts and what are your ideas to balance that out a little bit? Because these big farms have acquired a lot of land, they have a lot of power, they are, of course, even better equipped than the small farms, but then there is the danger that they will swallow up the small farmer that we're talking about. So yeah, can you clarify that for us a little bit, and can you talk a bit about
yes, sure, yes.
How do you think things should?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's important to realize that most of the farms in the European Union are really, let's say, family farms. And you have small family farms, and you have also, let's say, greater family farms. So also family farms can vary in size. So the point is how to define what's small and what's large. And I think we have to realize that a certain size is needed in order to be competitive. We have also a lot of, I think in Europe, a lot of real small farms with maybe 1 cow or 2 cows or 1 hectare and 2 hectares. yeah, and a lot of these farms, well, for their incomes, they don't really depend on their income from agriculture, because sometimes you have a job, another job, as advisor, for example, like that. So I think it's important to promote, especially the family farm, but we have to realize, in my opinion, that also family farms sometimes, that they need a certain size, and we have to I think promote especially that farms, and maybe we can think about the kind of a ceiling for really big industrial farms. But in my view, the wording industrial is also kind of a frame, in my opinion, because for example, in the Netherlands, you need to have a kind of a size as farm to be competitive in the current situation.
I see. Yeah, that explains things, and thank you. It's helpful, and it's useful to hear the details and to hear the things explained. I'm just going to wrap up our talk here, but I would like to maybe go just back a little bit to just discuss sustainability a bit more, just before we end, because that is, just like you said, pretty much one of the main sticking points in the discussions between the institutions, between farmers, and so these eco schemes and because the eco schemes are part of the condition, or the conditionality clause, under which a farmer receives subsidies from the government, from the EU. So a lot of people not a lot of, but some of the environmentalist groups, or as you said, some parties on the left, are saying that there are loopholes, and some farmers, or some large farms, can even take advantage of those loopholes to say, oh, see, we comply with the rules, so just we deserve these subsidies. But then these people say, well, in reality, they're not really complying with the rules or with biodiversity goals, because they're just leaving a part of their land that they wouldn't cultivate anyway, because it's a forest or because it's on a hill, and then that way they can show that they comply with the rules. So that is an example of one loophole, for instance, in biodiversity. Can you speak to that, and can you maybe help us understand if the goals that the Commission has suggested, I mean, you did point to that it shouldn't be top down, but we do need to have goals. Do you think they're a burden for the farmers? Do you think they're too ambitious and there's no way we can achieve them, even if we do close the loopholes? So go ahead.
Yeah, well, what I think is we need a kind of a new architecture, a kind of a new system, and that's one of the main issues in the negotiation. I think what we need is a kind of a basic income support, a basic premium. The European Parliament said, well, that at least 60% of the budget must be used for the basic premium. I think that's okay. And what we have is a kind of conditionality system. So that means that in order to get the basic premium, you have to respect the conditionality. You have to respect the basic rules. Right? Mm-hmm. You have to take care of different issues, and you have, for example, to protect permanent grassland. I see that as a kind of, let's say, baseline. For me, I don't see there kind of loopholes. I think it's a kind of a baseline. In order to, so then the income support, the 60% is not just income support, it is also a kind of rewarding for respecting the rules in the field of sustainability, animal welfare, and so on. In addition to that, we need, there's a need for what we call the specific eco schemes. And that then, as I said before, as the council said, well, 20% we have to reserve 20% for eco schemes. The parliament's 30%. But I think, and that's a new instrument, the eco scheme. I think these eco schemes can be used for rewarding the farmers more specifically for their efforts on their farm. And what's really important in that respect, I think, is that these eco schemes must be flexible, because the situation in the different regions differ. You can't compare the situation in Netherlands with the situation in Hungary, for example. So what we need is tailor-made, really specific eco schemes. Mm-hmm. So that's my philosophy. We need a kind of a new system, and then we can use indeed the common agricultural policy for, let's say, strengthening again the resilience of the farm, to secure our food production, to support the income of the farmers. And in addition to that, the common agricultural policy can play a really important role in supporting a sustainable agriculture.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this. It is definitely, like I said, an essential topic because our food depends on it. Our daily living depends on it. So we will definitely continue. We will watch what is going on in the trilogues and in the negotiations between the different institutions. And yeah, we will keep everyone up to date on the development.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.